Windows PowerShell scripts. In this nugget, we're finally going to take a look at scripting in Windows PowerShell. We'll start by looking at the fact that using the shell ad hoc, or from the command line, is exactly the same as scripting. And I'll actually demonstrate it to prove it. We'll take a very brief review of scripting security because it's such an important topic, and then I'll show you a basic script that performs a useful task that you might want to type in and save for yourself to have available. Then we'll look at taking that script slightly further and parameterizing it so that the script can be used in multiple different situations without actually having to go in and modify the script. So the first thing we need to get out of the way is the fact that Windows PowerShell does not draw a distinction between using the shell interactively and using a script. Now, to sort of demonstrate this, I'm going to need to jump ahead of myself just a little bit to show you a simple Windows PowerShell script. Simple PS1. The practical upshot of this is it counts from 0 to 100. Let's launch the shell. What the script code is actually doing is less important than the fact that I can run the script and it counts from 0 to 100, well, to 99. And that's interesting, but I ran a script. What if I were to type the same commands right into the shell? Well, first of all, let me actually just copy this to the clipboard. Go here into Windows PowerShell, hit Edit, Paste, hit Enter a couple times to finish that off, and it runs. So really, just pasting that into the shell is exactly the same as running it from a script. Well, can I just manually type it into the shell? Sure, let's make this window small enough that I can see both at the same time, and we'll demonstrate that using the shell interactively is no different from a script. For I equals 0, semicolon, we're going to continue the loop while I is less than 100, and each time through we're going to increment I by 1. So I'm just manually typing exactly what was in that script file. You can see that PowerShell changed its prompt because it knows I'm in the middle of this sort of construct and I must have more to say. So we're going to say write host I, close the construct, let PowerShell know we're done, and the same thing runs. So scripting in Windows PowerShell is 100% identical to using the shell interactively, which actually gives you another interesting benefit. For example, let's say I've worked out a kind of a complex command that I may need to run multiple times. I'm going to get all the processes, sort them on physical memory in descending order, select just the first 10, format what's left as a table showing the name and the ID with auto size. Okay, let's say I'm delighted with that command. It works and does exactly what I need. Highlight that, hit Enter to copy it to the clipboard, open up a script editor, or in this case Windows Notepad, paste that in. We will save it as procs.ps1. I'm going to make sure to put this in quotation marks if you're inside Windows Notepad so it doesn't add a txt file name extension. So there I've created a script. Now whenever I want to do that same command, I just run my script. And it works identically. And that's a great way to really arrive at a script. Do stuff in the shell interactively. Recall the command, modify it, try running it with different parameters. Once you get it working exactly like you want, copy and paste it into a script and you'll be able to run that same command simply without having to type it all. Ultimately, that's the only difference between using a shell interactively and putting something into a script. With a script, you only have to type it once. In the shell, you have to type it every time you want to run that exact same command. So a script is really nothing more than, well, a shortcut for people who can't type very fast. Now before we go any further, just because it's such an important topic, let's quickly review Windows PowerShell's scripting security. First of all, Windows PowerShell has an execution policy, and you modify this using the set execution policy commandlet, and you can examine the current one using get execution policy. The default is restricted, which means that scripts will not run unless you modify the execution policy. You can control the execution policy globally through Active Directory using a group policy extension. My recommendation is all signed for a production environment, because that prevents your Windows PowerShell profiles from becoming a potential security risk. In a development environment, you may choose to use the remote signed execution policy, but be aware that this does have security risks associated with the Windows PowerShell profile. Windows PowerShell associates the PS1 file name extension by default with Windows Notepad, so you can't double-click a PowerShell script to run it. You actually have to be inside the shell to do it. And once you're inside the shell, you must specify a path in order to run a script. You can't just type the script name even if you're in the directory where the script exists. You would at least have to type period slash or period backslash with the name of the script. So those are sort of PowerShell's way of keeping scripts from becoming a malicious problem in your environment. Now the other thing I need to point out, because we're about to really get into scripting, is that Windows Notepad is not an acceptable script editor for Windows PowerShell. It's just a basic text editor. You're going to want things in a script editor like color coding and IntelliSense, things that help you not make typing mistakes, syntax errors, and things that help you remember PowerShell syntax and so forth. There are several commercial ones. I'm going to be using a free one, again from Quest Software. So we'll go to quest.com/PowerShell. And it's called PowerGUI. Now PowerGUI has a couple of components to it. The one I'm really going to focus on is the script editor. So I've already downloaded and installed this. So I'll find it on my Start menu under PowerGUI, PowerGUI Script Editor. So this is just a better way than Windows Notepad of working with Windows PowerShell scripts. I'm using this one because it's available free of charge. So there's no reason to say, well, I'm just going to stick with Windows Notepad because I don't want to spend any money, or the boss won't spend any money, or I don't have the money. You don't need any money. You can just go get the PowerGUI script editor if all you need is a simple, free Windows PowerShell script editor. Let's take a look at a basic script that I've already created. This is in my demo folder. It's called simpleping.ps1. And we're not going to worry so much about exactly what this is doing, because in the next nugget we're really going to break down this scripting language and talk about it. But let's just sort of broadly look at what it's intended to do. I'm putting the word localhost into the variable computer. I'm then executing get_wmyObject, and I'm executing a wmy query. Now notice that my query is contained in double quotation marks. Only the outermost set of quotation marks governs this PowerShell replacement behavior, whereby $computer will actually be replaced with the contents of that variable. So I'm executing that to ping whatever computer is in $computer. The resulting WMI object will be stored in the variable $result. One of the properties it has is status code. So if the status code equals 0, then I'm going to write the computer is pingable. Otherwise, I will write the computer is not pingable. One of the neat things about working with an editor is that you don't have to drop down to the PowerShell console window to actually run this. We're going to first, just to see what happens here. Let's run simple ping. It says localhost is pingable. I could, however, just come up and press the start right here, and that's going to let me run it. And it says localhost is pingable. Also breaks down all the variables so I can see what's going on inside of my script and everything else. Now let's put a computer then that we know is not here, just to make sure we're testing both sides of the equation. And it's taking a little longer, and then finally it comes back and says not here is not pingable. So my script basically works both ways. And this is really all that a Windows PowerShell script is. It's a series of regular Windows PowerShell commands, maybe some language elements to help add some logic making or some repeating to it if you have a repetitive task you want to complete. But the idea is to just string together normal PowerShell commands that you might have just typed at the command line, so that you have a repeatable, consistent process sort of embedded in this script that you can then run whenever you need to perform that particular task. Now, a problem with this particular script is that I have hard-coded its main operational value. That means if I want to be able to use this script in different situations, every single time I'm going to have to open it up, modify this value to be the value that I need for right then, save it, and run it again. That sort of whole workflow isn't very useful. It's certainly not very efficient. And you might want to share this script with someone who's simply not comfortable opening up a script and editing it. Certainly a help desk technician or someone who doesn't have the scripting experience might look at this and might get a little worried. Maybe they're going to change the right thing. Maybe they might come down here and type the new value, and that means it wouldn't work the way it was supposed to. So what I'd like to do is parameterize this, and it's really easy in PowerShell. If you start writing your script so that all of your key values go into variables near the top of the script, here's how easy it is to turn those into parameters. I simply took that same line, computer equals localhost, and wrapped it in a param block. Now notice that these are parentheses, not curly braces. That can get a little bit difficult to see on the screen sometimes because the difference, these are curly braces, the difference is really only a single pixel. So it can be a little tough to see, but just understand these are parentheses. What this is doing is setting up the first parameter to go into the computer variable, and if I forget to specify a parameter, it will assign it the default value of localhost. So just to see this in action, let's go down here to the command line and run it. I'm not going to run it with any parameters. So it takes the default of localhost and says that localhost is pingable. Now let's specify a parameter of not here. Takes it a second, but not here is not pingable. So I can run it again with localhost. This time I'll actually specify it. Localhost is pingable. Let's try another computer. Let's try Nuggets1. Nuggets1 is pingable. So by parameterizing my script, I've enabled it to be used as, really almost as a kind of command line tool. Not quite a commandlet in the PowerShell sense, but certainly it's going to be easier for someone else to use this functionality on other places. This particular script is something that we're going to continue to build on throughout the next several nuggets. We'll start in the next nugget by really breaking down what this scripting language is doing, but then we're going to continually refine the modularization of this script so that it can be used in more and more different circumstances to really build up to something that's a useful, standalone, reusable command line tool right within Windows PowerShell. In this nugget, we looked at Windows PowerShell scripting. We started by looking at the fact that using the shell interactively and writing commands in a script is exactly the same. And that's a really important concept because it means you can test something at the command line and then just paste it into a script once you've got it working. There's no difference between using the command line interactively and putting commands into a script. They behave exactly the same. We did a brief overview of Windows PowerShell's scripting security, and this is where I really have to remind you that in a production environment, the all-signed execution policy is the only one that's safe if you need to do scripting. We took a look at a basic script that performed a useful task, and we saw how to parameterize that script so that you could maybe share it with other people in your environment, such as a maybe less skilled technician, give them the benefit of what the script does without requiring them to be able to go in and modify the script themselves. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.